Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor, and I hope that we can make this talk very informal. So please, interrupt me with thoughts and questions. I'm sure that there are many people at the table who have faced this question of how to explain, if not translate, Turkey here, and I would be in this country and others, and I would be very, very interested to find out what your experiences have been and what insights you draw from it. So I feel like I'm going to be talking to, I have this terrible feeling I'm going to be talking to lots of experts, and you just tell me what you know so that I don't repeat it to you. Now, as you just heard, I write novels, I translate, and I do lots and lots and lots of journalism of many, many different kinds. But I want you to know that I'm really, by training, by self-training, I'm a novelist. I was a novelist first. And I never intended to become a translator. And I certainly woke up in the middle of the night last night and thought, how did I let this happen? And I also never, I always wanted I was always interested in journalism, but I did not have proper formation as a journalist, unlike certain people I'm not going to look at here. And I just wandered into that as well. And the way in which I write journalism and the way I translate has an awful lot to do with starting out in novels. In another way, you could say, I could say that I have been translating in one way or another almost all my conscious life. And my earliest memory of translating must be from about 1962 when I was with my family. And I was very good at picking up languages, and we had gone to Greece. We were living in Istanbul, gone to Greece, and I'd learned quite a bit because I was playing with the children in the village where we were living. And so my father decided I spoke perfect Greek, and which wasn't the case. And there we were in Piraeus, and we were trying to get it negotiate with a taxi driver, and it was going all wrong. And so my father said to me, "Tell that son of a bitch that you're not going to do it. Tell him he's a bastard," and so on. And I stood there, and everybody was looking at me, and I just said, "My father's very angry at you." and that's still how I feel. When I think about translation, it's being caught in the middle with very angry people who are using you to talk to each other, and if you say the wrong thing, that you're going to cause an incident, at best an incident. And also, but I think that the being sensitive to those problems is the secret to a wise translation. Anyway, it would be, and I think it's good to always be considering all those problems and finding a way through. Now, you heard the number of the questions that I'm going to be asking myself here. How to talk about Turkey to an Anglophone audience, and where do you have to start, and what are the problems you run into, and more recently this question of taboo subjects, how you address those, and most important to me is how when I'm writing about Turkey, I'm usually, especially with journalism, writing about some really, really grim things, and that's not what I want people to. Those grim things are going on, but that's not why I love Turkey. That's not why I'm interested in it. So how do you convey that that other Turkey, or the Turkey that I love, when the only time the people I work for in newspapers want to know about Turkey is when something's gone wrong? So these are the paradoxes. Now, in the last 5 years, I've been doing lots of translation, lots of journalism, and my own novel. And I wanted to spend this talk describing how they combine and how they sometimes amplify each other and sometimes complicate each other. And I hope it doesn't sound too much like gossip. And I hope you won't tell anybody when I tell you. But I thought I'd begin by just very quickly, or as quickly as possible, explaining my early years in Turkey, because what I have been doing for the past 5 years has very much to do with that formation. As some of you will know, my family moved to Istanbul in 1960 when I was 8 years old, and we were only going to stay 3 years. And then my family, we all fell in love with Istanbul and never quite managed to leave. Now, what I remember, I mean, it's ironic when we start thinking about what's going on with history in Turkey right now, but we were in awe of the history because we came from a country that we didn't think of as having any, and so there we were, just surrounded by all this history, and of course, living in what was then Robert College, which is now Boğaziçi, it was a bohemian paradise in those days. We lived in beautiful houses. There were people, the most wonderful students with most interesting backgrounds, which would take us years and years to find out about because everybody pretended to be the same, and then you'd find out, well, my grandmother was actually from. Okay, so the longer we stayed, the more interesting the stories of our friends became. The better the combinations, and so it was this great free space. Of course, the '60s were probably the most open culturally and politically decade, at least the early to mid '60s. We won't count 1960. We won't count 1969, 70, but just in the middle there. But there were these clouds that went by, and then they would pass. And the first cloud that I remember very well, and how old would I have been at the time? I would have been 12. The Cyprus crisis of 1964. Some of you will remember that. And we lived in a town along the Bosphorus, Bebek, for those of you who don't know Istanbul, and it was half Greek. Maybe more than half Greek. Greek was always heard in the streets and in the restaurants, and then the crisis came, and there was no more Greek, and the Greeks were gone. And as time went on, we found a number of these people when we happened to go to Athens, and we'd see them. But that was my first sort of experience of politics. It's just didn't know where it came from, and then people are gone, and why, and then. The whys and the wherefores weren't much discussed, and in the late '60s, I went to a primary school for international primary school. But luckily, when I was 15, I was able to move to what was then the American College for Girls, and is now, of course, a combination with the old Robert Academy and its Robert College, and. It was only then that I had the opportunity to start learning Turkish, because before then I had no Turkish friends at all. I'd go to Greece for the summer and I'd have lots and lots of friends. So it wasn't me. It just didn't seem to be possible. It wasn't made possible. But from that moment on, I had and continue to have I'm still very close friends with my classmates. And I wasn't taught Turkish even there. I just eavesdropped on my friends for a year, and I picked it up that way. And then I started eavesdropping on my boyfriends, and I kept quiet for much longer with my boyfriends because I wanted to know what they really thought of me. And I found out. So that was all wonderful, but there were some clouds that go through there as well. First of all, as you remember, from 1964, the country goes from quite pro-American to quite virulently anti-American. That's kind of hard for an adolescent to bear. And then I had this brilliant classmate. I'm not going to tell you her name. I'm not going to tell you her name because I'm going to tell you more about her later. Who used to tease me, and she was very far left, and she'd say, "Sit down, have something to eat," and then she'd say, "Justify your country, justify your country," and then I'd say, "Well, I don't support Vietnam," and she said, "Then why haven't you ended it?" And then she would tell me I was a cultural imperialist and I was polluting the country just by being there. And I stupidly took all this very seriously. But actually, she's such a brilliant, amazing person. Have you figured out who she is, Stephen? That she was very good at an argument. So maybe I had no hope. But I really, I was both worried about this, and then I rejected it. And there was a whole group of these girls, most of whom had their politics from their boyfriends. I went off to college, and I just put all that behind me. And then, of course, in 1971, there's a coup, and a number of my classmates, not this particular brilliant one, but a number of my classmates, were implicated in something that some of you may remember, which we call the trunk murder. And it was a group of Maoists, student Maoists, who were told that they had an informer, agent provocateur, in their midst, and there was one person was killed, was murdered by the other members of the cell, and the boys disappeared. The girls were left to get rid of the body. They were caught trying to take the trunk into the Bosphorus, and they were arrested. And one of them was, either jumped from a very high fourth floor window, I think, during interrogation. Now, for my generation, that still very, very murky thing. It's never been fully explained, and if something's never fully explained, it kind of stays in your head. And I think for me it became more haunting because when I got to one of the great themes of my life is I do lots of interesting things because I'm always having to make money. I'm always running out of money and have to make money. So I was working for Amnesty International as a secretary, just to make ends meet. This would be in the mid-'70s, and because I had some Turkish, they said, "Well, can you help us to, translate some prison accounts?" Well, I translated them. I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on. But a lot of the accounts I was translating were people from. They were my age. They were from my schools. They were my generation. It was a terrible, terrible blow for somebody who was politically naive, if you like, and. So, of course, then 1980 comes, and that's an even much more brutal coup. And during that time, I continued to translate on occasion for Amnesty whenever they needed a little bit of extra help. And I do remember how much more distressing it was to translate those accounts after 1980. And I was my first computer, I remember deciding it was so painful I would just put it onto my Amstrad. Do you remember Amstrads? Do they ever have those here? So that was my first computer tragedy, that I had put several days worth of agony into this, and then I pressed the wrong button and it was all done and I had to start all over again. Around that time I've written six novels. The second one, also, there's another, Life of the Party is an earlier novel that takes place in Turkey. And takes place at Robert College. But the question behind that was it was looking at the big party that the '60s were, and then it all falls apart. And the conceit there is that the life of the party stops drinking, and what happens if the life of the party stops drinking? People start seeing things for as they are. There's no glue holding it together, and it all falls apart. Now. That's one of three of my novels that has its breaking point in 1970. This Enlightenment new one also has its breaking point in 1970. And the question behind that was, why did this paradise turn into this war zone? I'm just beginning to understand. But I'm mentioning the life of the party because this is my first experience of the problems of translating Turkey or life in Turkey into a novel that's being published in English in this country, because the life of the party in my book is pretty wild, and at a certain point there's a big party. This is the party at which he finally disgraces himself and has to give up drinking, but he's dancing. He's doing a kind of a goat dance, as we used to call a line dance, and he's dressed in nothing but a flag. And he's being very, very disgraceful. He's going outside his house. This is not a real person. Okay, it's just a guy in my novel. But he's doing this disgraceful thing in the middle of the night, and a maid sees him out of her. She's looking out her window, and she's just appalled because she sees him in the Turkish flag. Doing this. She's absolutely outraged. And now the copy editor made this big remark next and said, "That's absolutely impossible." She said, "No maid would live close enough to her master's house to be able to see into his garden. This is Rumelisa." And I thought, this copy editor thinks the whole world is zoned. And later on in that same party, she was very cross with me. One of the boys, the boy of the family, goes out and he runs into a rabid dog. He gets bitten by a rabid dog. And then his mother is very angry at there was kind of family argument and so on, and the family argument goes on for pages. So we all, those of us who know Turkey know that you have to go to the Kuduz Hastasane, you have to go to the rabies hospital, and that opens in the morning, and it's down in the old city. But the copy editor wasn't patient enough to wait for that. So she just writing and saying, why doesn't this mother send her with her child to the doctor? What kind of irresponsible mother is this? So even neither of these things would I have ever considered being problems. So it's at that point where I start noticing the ideas that people not familiar to Turkey will bring to anything about Turkey, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I stayed away from Turkey during the 80s, partly for political reasons, partly not. But at the time when I started going back, as many of you will know, the Turkey I've been describing and the Turkey I was so upset about was changing, and there was a renaissance beginning, and things were opening up in all sorts of ways, and the old constraints seemed to be slowly going away, I got interested in doing journalism at that point because about Turkey, because I felt that part of the story was always being left out. The very rich cultural and intellectual debates going on, and I felt that by the end of when the Iron Curtain came down, Istanbul stopped feeling like an outpost, and it started feeling like the center of its world, and more significant and more confident and important. And I was particularly impressed by how people, my old classmates who'd been through so much, and so many of whom had been in prison twice and tortured, how they didn't talk about it when they came out, just carried on with their lives. And I couldn't understand how they could do that, because I knew I wouldn't have been able to do that. I just thought that there was some kind of greatness or courage in them. And I very naively thought that this would be interesting to ask them about the trunk murder now, and now that it was going to be possible to speak about these things again. Well, I did. I went and I talked to a lot of people about the trunk murder, about the coup of 1971, about how, the way in which address books were used and other people taken, just how the arrests would not be anything but arresting one person and then using the address book to arrest all their friends and then their friends and their friends. I wrote a piece for Prospect magazine about being more or less what I've been telling you now, and being cut off from Turkey and being very sort of haunted by the things that had gone wrong, and then seeing things opening up. And I quoted one person, one of my friends. I was speaking to people, telling them I was going to be writing about it, by the way. And one friend told me kind of half the story of her arrest, and it ends with her standing in front of the Salimia barracks. I think that's it. And she said, and I said, what happens next? And she says, you have to come back next year, and I'll tell you next year. And what I meant by that was, you've been stupid and you've been foolish to stay away. And you should come back. You should become part of us again. That's what I thought. That friend has never spoken to me again, and I just still don't know quite why. But it became clear that I was not going to be writing a book about the trunk murder, and that if I carried on looking into this, my life wasn't seem to be worth very much. And generally, what I wanted to find out, I'd find out much better, much more easily with fiction. And so, fiction is where you go to find out not what was, but what might have been, what could have been. I wanted to know, why did this paradise disappear? How could people go through this hell and then come back to normal lives? And what does it really mean if you live in a place where free expression is dangerous? I mean, what does it do to people's understanding of their own pasts, and how does friendship survive under those conditions? Because it does. So I just wanted to capture that kind of, or explore that frame of mind. And it was only when I started working on the novel that I realized what a Cold War childhood I had, and how many odd people there were amongst the foreigners. And realized it kind of a recipe for disaster. And one of the reasons it has such a complicated plot was I wanted to capture what it's like to be in a place where nobody's quite talking about the past, but it's there in the present and it's ready to bite you at any minute. But anyway, all that's going on. I write novels very, very slowly, and then I run out of money, and then I do lots of other things. I had been writing a lot, going back to Turkey every time I could have an excuse, and so a bomb, an earthquake, a trial, I would get to go home, which is kind of a sorry way of going home. But also one of the nice things is I love Orhan's books, and I used to know his brother, and we renewed our friendship, and so we would meet when I'd go back or when he'd come to London. And then in 2002, I think it was, I got this horrifying phone call from him. And he said, we need a translator for Snow because the other translator can't do it, and would you give it a try? And I was horrified because, as I've told you, taught myself Turkish. I never set out to become a translator. If I'd known how famous he was going to become, I would never have taken it on board. If I thought that I was going to get the kind of scrutiny. I used to be very happy to speak Turkish all the time as a self-taught person, and now I only speak to people who don't know who I translate. Otherwise, it was like that. So I also, coming on now to translation. Now, what I really wanted to do was find out, without compromising the Turkishness of the books and the context, and without explaining it, how do you bring those books into English in a way so that they can stand by themselves. This question, when Orhan and I would talk about it, and I would do translation, and then we would talk sentence by sentence, take through it, and work out an aesthetic through some pleasant arguments and some not pleasant arguments. But for me, again, because I'm a novelist, what I wanted to do was to, first of all, establish the trance that I feel that he establishes from the first sentence of any of his novels in Turkish. And that meant making shifts with the structure of the Turkish sentences, which even now is controversial for reasons that maybe you can explain to me. Because I have to explain to you, no verb to be, no verb to have. Yes, loves the passive voice and noun clauses. One verb for he, she, and it. This is the English-speaking person's version of Turkish. Very, very agile, flexible language. And so, but when you get it into, it's like Latin in that if there's a word that has 8 suffixes on it. It'll be all by itself, but then you can put it in different places and everybody knows where it is. And so you can imagine what a mess it becomes if you try to put it into English. So the question of how do you move something forward, how do you keep the music without breaking too many rules, seemed to me that the only way of doing that without being an orientalizer was to speak to the author and to come up with a good, if the two of us decided that we had come up with a solution, then it was all right. And so that was very, very difficult, especially because my vocabulary was very, very way down at that point. My vocabulary is very good now, at least for words that he uses. But the big shock was sending it into the publication process. Now, being a novelist, I know what the normal thing is. You get you get edited, and then you get copy edited, and you get edited. You see it as the author. You get copy edited. You answer all the queries, and then you get the galleys, and you check those again, and you add to them, and then you get another set, and maybe even another set. So this is what I was accustomed to, and this book, is a successful, very, very successful author, being published in England and America at the same time. I said, well, when am I going to see these things? They said, why do you need to see them? And I was shocked that Orhan didn't know that he was supposed to see these things. And then I was shocked to see what they thought they could get away with. Now, the copy editor in England for Snow, he really liked the hero Ka in the beginning, and then in the middle of it, he decided that Ka was not being very nice to İpek, and he really should treat her better. And so he decided to change the book, so that he did. He told me and they didn't track the changes, so that actually when he changed the motivation, I had to go with it as a detective and find out, where he'd changed the motivation. And this is after I expressly reminded him that this is not a copy editor's job. But I think, I suspect that this happens all the time with anybody who doesn't know how things are usually done. The ways in which, I'm not quite, I know that my own publishing house in Istanbul, it's pretty rigorous about showing me every step of the way. But I don't think Orhan had been shown things the same way, so he was being taken advantage of. And he also, this same copy editor, changed the ending. He didn't like that either. And then in America, where they had a responsible, they were tracking changes and they were asking for permission. The editor, who's a really good editor, but he just doesn't know Turkey. And there's something at the end of the book in which a fireman is talking about what happened at the end of the coup, and he's telling it all to the sad strains of the saz. And this editor changed saz to sax. So that's and also there's some weird dictionary of international terms. There's a long routine in the book about some sort of cafe where they're making sherbet, and the sherbet is supposed to be poisoning Turks but not Kurds. It's kind of an extended joke. And they decided that sounded like ice cream. The reader would think it was ice cream. Therefore, and also they couldn't find sherbet in this weird dictionary of things, and foreign things. And so they decided to change it to salep, which is the sherbet being a fruit drink, the salep being a milk drink. And I said, well, no, it's not. And they just said, well, it's in this dictionary. And they also said in the dictionary that the standard spelling for the Bosphorus was without the H. And I nearly killed them then. I said, I grew up on the Bosphorus, and I'm going to decide how to spell it. There were also a lot of other terms for which they insisted on using the Arab word, which I thought was, in fact, in the end, they didn't use salep. I wouldn't let them use that, but instead of saying sherbet, they said sharbat, which is the Arab thing. And I said, do you realize the ironies of putting an Arab word into a Turkish book? The reader won't know about that. The reader doesn't care. So that's the way it is, and it goes through that. And every step, every time we went to the next stage, somebody would have put in a lot of mistakes. So you had to go through it again and through it again, and then of course when the book came out, it was read and understood by a lot of people. But most of the people I have met who've read that book do not understand it at all. And take it to mean all sorts of things that it doesn't mean. Thank you, Orhan, for explaining the East to us. They'll say, what? Or they'll assume that he's doing a State of the Nation for the White House, and so this is flattening. One artist's understanding of a particular time in a particular way is taken as a bulletin, and and it goes on and on like that. It's made my going to parties and dinner parties is hell now. Because I just read Snow. It still goes on because people are still reading Snow. Yes, and oh, those Islamists, the things they're doing to Turkey. And I said, is that all you got from the book? Yes, that's all I got from the book. Now, I call irony is after this friend who's I'm not going to name, made me so miserable about cultural imperialism, and I went for decades saying, I'm not a cultural imperialist, I'm not. Well, now I felt when I went through this experience that I ended up on the other side of some wall, and I started seeing just what cultural imperialism started, what it felt like, and that was quite a shock. And during all this time when I'm translating all these books by Orhan, because after Snow comes Istanbul, after Istanbul comes the Black Book, after the Black Book comes Other Colors, and now I'm doing Museum of Innocence. Turkey is it's not really in the news as much here, is it? No, because it's in the news all the time in England and Europe now.
You just don't have any reporters there, that's all.
There's
plenty of news.
I know, well, we'll get there, yeah. And so suddenly I was doing an awful lot of journalism to do with Turkey in one way or another, and it has everything to do with with EU accession, and so the questions that the beginning. If I'm trying to translate Turkey, or make it visible, or explain something rather to the audience in Britain, it will begin with a sentence. For example, the Today program, the most important, the flagship discussion program, and the Prime Minister listens to it, and all the most important people go on to that on Monday morning. And I was on that, and Andrew Marr, very distinguished journalist, he said, first thing, I used to think that we should let Turkey into the EU, but now all these things going on, I don't think we should let them. And that's the starting point, and how those kind of starting points frame everything that comes on after it. It's all firefighting, and another one is this is after Orhan started doing very, very well. They called me up from the Times Books page, and they said we were just talking in meeting, and writers. Do they? Yeah, we know about Orhan, but do they have any others? I said, yeah, and I said, have you heard? Do you like poetry? Yeah. I said, have you heard of Nazım Hikmet? No. I said, well, have you heard of Yasha Kemal? He almost won the Nobel Prize. Never heard of him. I said, well, those are two. And they said, is there anything else? I said, do you know anything about the Ottoman literature? What's Ottoman literature? They said, and I said, well, there is some. And I explained it a little bit, and then I talked about some other writers. And then they said, okay, that sounds like there's an article in this. Why don't you tell us all about the Ottoman literature and Turkish Republican literature, and you can have 700 words. And then, of course, I did that, and I'm glad it never came out, because if you have 700 words, you're going to get some people very angry by leaving them out. But they actually didn't print it, because in the end, something more important turned up. So that's kind of what you're up against. And another starting point is, why do they have to come into Europe? Why can't they just go to their friends in the East? What friends? I'm saying, the whole. Where do you start? But as you can tell, I talk too much, and so I always fall into these traps. Now we're coming up to the Renaissance is still going. What I would call the Renaissance is still going on at this point. People, you're starting to hear Greek music in the streets. You have limited Kurdish cultural rights. You have all sorts of people talking about their family histories in a way that hadn't happened before. And you have quite a few Turkish scholars in dialogue with Armenian diaspora scholars and opening up questions about the official history and about questioning in what seemed to me to be a very soft way, questioning monoculturalism. And then, of course, Orhan makes his famous remarks off the record while making a journalist's tea. And then we have a very, very long hate campaign Then we're talking about 2005 now. And during when Kemal Kerensiz opened the case against Orhan in the summer of 2005, in England, nobody was paying attention to it, and for a long time, I was the only person who was writing about any of the prosecutions after I found a band of brothers and sisters, and so we started sharing it out. But for a while, I was the one who was doing it all, and I felt I had the obligation because he was my friend, and also I felt I had obligation to give some publicity and context, or actually to put on the table that there were an awful lot of other writers who were being prosecuted for insulting Turkishness or the memory of Ataturk or the judiciary. And it was really, once that story got going, of course it went all over the world, and my life was hell because I'm a journalist, anybody can find me, and I had all these creepy people calling me up, and because they were all trying to look for him. Do you find that? Do you get
occasionally? I do
occasionally,
get those calls.
yeah. But I think I put myself out there by trying to. I didn't want to tell people how to think about these prosecutions, but I wanted them to understand where they'd come from, because generally people would say, why is Orhan being prosecuted? Is it those jihadis? Because that was the only, not knowing and thinking that it's Al-Qaeda or something like that. So you just say, no, that this is this is what's going on. But of course, whenever you're trying to explain it in England, you can count on having no more than 800 words. So it's this horrible thing about, explaining this really difficult political situation, and trying to put something in, do you know, mentioning the Treaty of Sèvres. Now, do you know the Treaty of Sèvres? Okay. Now, but the rest of you know the Treaty of Sèvres, yes? I mean, every Turkish schoolchild knows about it, and it had to do. It was after World War I. In 1920, when Turkey almost got parceled out by the victorious European powers, and it was Ataturk that stopped it. So it's a very significant date. It's very significant in the debate about the EU as well, because the ultranationalists could say, see, the Europeans are coming in and they're trying to divide us up again, and they're going to give a big part to the Kurds and a big part to the Armenians and so on and so forth. But it's curious that nobody, although it was a European, it wasn't a successful treaty, but it was a European treaty, but nobody in Europe knows about it. And I know people I've explained the Treaty of Sèvres to about 18 times, and they still don't know about it. I think their eyes glaze over when I mention the treaty. So you have to do all of that in 800 words, and not get through. Now, what happens when you have only 800 words is that you simplify. You have to, or you have these formulas. And so there was a horrible moment, a horrible phase when maybe it wasn't that horrible, when Orhan became a little character in my columns. So it's very. It was very, very difficult for our relationship. I mean, he needed to have the visibility of his case abroad, and he knew that. But it's very, very difficult. I've seen it's very difficult to be helped by groups representing freedom of expression. It's agony, and then it's agony, and then you have to say thank you. I mean, I can say that, but the people on the receiving end can't. And so, coming up to the trial, which is Orhan's trial, which is in 2005, and I attended it. And during that trial, I saw, because I was there, I saw how it was being set up for consumption of for the domestic television audience in order to put forward the ultranationalist message. But I also was corralled for many hours with some very, very ugly and scary ultranationalist types, and I was eyeball to eyeball with a lot of the people who are now on trial. And I came back from the trial furious. And the question that people would say, oh, do you think Orhan's going to go to prison? And I'd say, no, that's not the problem. it's not that he's going to go to prison, but he's going to become a household face and household name, and he's going to become a death target, and a lot of other people are going to become death targets. And so I went back. Independent rang me up, and they said this trial seemed to be a bit violent, because the ultranationalists were attacking the EU parliamentarians. The former minister for Europe from Britain was attacked inside the courtroom and outside on camera. And so this editor says, who's behind this? And I was so furious. I said, you want to know who's behind this? You want to know who's behind this? I said, okay. And then I did my first deep state article. And which caused a lot of, made a lot of people very, very upset. It certainly made Orhan very upset. And then I started getting very weird write-ups in Turkish newspapers. That's what happens if you translate Turkey in the wrong way abroad. And the funniest one was in Vatan, I think, and it was a big, it's a full page, and it said, who is Maureen Freely? That was what it said. And then it said, who is the woman, this is a good mixed metaphor, who is the woman who has served as Orhan Pamuk's anchor during his meteoric rise to fame? And then it had a picture of Orhan looking kind of silly on a sofa in front of the Bosphorus. It was a publicity photograph. And then it had a picture of me. And the story, and they got bits of pieces from the internet and so on, and they had much too much about my family, which I wasn't happy about. And they just said that I had been disappointed in my own career, and so I had put everything into getting my client the Nobel Prize. They hadn't won it yet, and so I was a super agent, is what they called me. I think you can work that without me. And after that, I can't tell you how many prominent writers on the other side, if you like, Kemalist writers, who had been giving me a hard time, leaving horrible messages on my parents' phone and so on. Suddenly, they're calling me up and asking me if I can represent them. Right. So one of the things that I found during all of that, what I call 301 season. 301 is the article in the Turkish Penal Code that makes insulting Turkishness a crime, is that there were the media systems were bouncing off each other. So if you translate Turkey for a Western audience, that gets picked up by Hürriyet or another Turkish newspaper and mistranslated and put back, and then your parents' friends get really upset about what Hürriyet says you've said, and then they leave a horrible message on your parents' answering machine. So there's no privacy, and I think still the freedom of expression groups in this country and in England, they just haven't caught on. They think, they really think that a Turkish 301 defendant can go to England and speak openly. It's just not the case. They can't even say, I can't speak openly, because that's to admit what's going on. Now, we were trying very hard to get a high profile for the other defendants, but in particular Hrant Dink, who was a good friend of Orhan's, a friend of all of ours, and we felt that as unpleasant as it was, this profile was abroad was helpful. But the only time we were ever allowed to mention him is in an article about Orhan, and we could mention him in paragraph 4 or 5. That was the only way we could get him in. And I'm still convinced that that's one of the reasons why he was assassinated in 2000. Yeah, he was assassinated in January 2007. Now, interestingly, what happened at that point, nobody cared about it. None of the gatekeepers at the newspapers would let anything about him through. But so many prominent journalists from all over the world knew him and understood his significance that by the time his funeral came, there was a huge amount of very, very good coverage by people who had worked with him. Now, I can tell you a little bit more about my book maybe later on, but I just want to bring to during all this, I don't know how I managed to finish my novel when I'm doing all this translation, and I also have a university job and all this going back and forth to these ugly trials with these ultranationalist thugs. But I just finish for the moment by just telling you a little bit about my last trip back to Turkey, and I'm really sad to say that was in January. I used to go back every few weeks, or it was just my other home. But I went back for two reasons. I work for English Pen, and I do stuff for International Pen, and there was going to be a lot of commemorations of the first anniversary of Hrant Dink's death. And so they wanted me to go. Now, during the year that after Hrant was assassinated, the most prominent 301 defendants had bodyguards imposed on them. And the bodyguards, of course, are protecting them and also keeping them under surveillance. There's the two things going on. And they don't have a choice. But they do. There is this, the only light side I can say is that they're always asking each other, how many bodyguards do you have? That's why I was asking, and kind of bragging about it sometimes. So I went back also because my novel Enlightenment was coming out in Turkish. And so when I arrived, my parents gave a little party, and I invited my friends that I'd been working on all these things with. One of my friends couldn't find the house, and so I went out with my cell phone to try to help her into the house. And 4 or 5 different details of bodyguards kind of circling, because so many of the friends who come to the party had bodyguards. And if inside the party, you'd never know. Everybody's having a good time or something. But that was the atmosphere back in January. Not long after that, I went on live television, and we were having a very open conversation about the deep state. So you have this going on, and then you have this open discussions. The next day, there was a keynote speech for the Hrant Dink lecture was given by the Indian novelist Arundhati Roy. She broke every single law in the Turkish Penal Code and probably every penal code in the whole world. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people of all ages there. It was a point to be there. There was then the vigil. Now, when Hrant Dink was buried, an estimated 100,000 people came. After a year of intimidation, there were only 12,000 people who dared to come to the vigil to mark the first anniversary. And there are an estimated 6,000 riot police. So that was, and we were all pushed in. I get very nervous now when I get pushed into these small groups. Small spaces with the riot police going back and forth and back and forth. I sensed that day they didn't want to make any trouble. I just had that sense. But there were, sharpshooters all along the avenue up there. It was very ominous. So you had so much going on the ground, literally on the ground, and then you have it's very clear who's running the show still. And I'd gone, and then another thing that happened to me while I was there is we were talking to some 301 defendants. Somebody else whose name I won't mention, quite a prominent one, went with some other 10 people to have lunch with him, her. No, I'll say her. Okay. And in the middle of the lunch, she turned on me and called me a dishonorable person and a human rights tourist. And it's not the only case in which there's been so much pressure put on people at the forefront of the democracy movements or whatever, that the language starts becoming ultranationalist as well. And even the friends who had invited us to partake in these vigils said, "Come as our friends. Don't say pen. Don't say this. Don't give any talks because we don't. Because to be seen with you will put us into a difficult position." So it's been an education finding out what actually how this kind of pressing down works and how it breaks people. Not immediately, but it was, I think, 2 days after I got back that the first swoop of arrests for Ergenekon occurred. And I think the night before I came back, I have to say, I was also in Iskele having dinner with Orhan. And then got back and there were these swoops. Now, the Ergenekon is allegedly a state-sponsored terrorist organization, and those taken in the first swoop of arrests, there have now been 86 people on trial. But these are the first 29 in January. They include some retired generals. They include the people, the high-up people who've been linked with the assassination of Hrant Dink, many other scandals. But closer to home, they've been linked with Kemal Karadzic, who's the ultranationalist lawyer who prosecuted Orhan and a lot of other prominent writers. And there's a trials. It's the biggest story in Turkey forever and ever, and there's all sorts of opinions about what's actually going on and who's driving this trial and how true the allegations are. But the thing to remember is what the allegations were at the beginning. It was alleged that this group was going to be was working towards a coup in 2009 and going to soften public opinion towards this coup, and they were planning a number of false flag terrorism acts and also some assassinations, some Kurdish politicians. But the first one was going to be Orhan, and they had hired the assassin and they had chosen the restaurant. I freaked out. It was not. It's somebody in my book. The number of times that I was going to these trials and coming back and starting to work on my book again. And one of the journalists in my book says, you don't choose stories, stories choose you. And this is the time when I felt the story had chosen me a bit too much. The thing that I am still, I have not had a chance to translate this particular chapter of political history, if you like, because nobody in this country or in England seems to be in the least interested in it. I don't understand it. Maybe somebody can tell me. But it's just, I know there are lots of opinions on it in Turkey, but the fact is it's just not even on the map here. So that's where I am now. Now, I got during one of later, this is, must have been about, Orhan and I have a lot of arguments. And this is one of the times when we're having an argument. He's mostly friends. We had an argument yesterday, if you could catch a little edge to my voice. But in one of these arguments about a year ago, he said to me, you know nothing. You know nothing. But you think you know something, and that makes you even more dangerous than if you knew nothing. And I think that's who I am. That's who I am. And that's certainly a good description of a novel, what a novelist is and perhaps should be doing. And and although I've never been reporter type journalist, it's advocacy or it's talking about the human side of things. I think that with the translations and with the journalism, what I'm always trying to do is to make that emotional connection. And do you remember when I was beginning, how do you write about the Turkey you love when you're talking about all these bad things? It's that connection. Now, even or maybe especially in the freedom of expression movement, there is this tendency to use the misfortunes of another country in order to make yourself feel good about your own free cultures. There are no free cultures, but you can use Turkey to feel good about wherever you live. So this kind of outside over there. And I think what I want to do more than providing a context is just to break that down and to use my own emotional connection to create that connection for other people, so that they want to know what they want to look beyond their prejudices, and they stop thinking about Turkey as this other place that they can put all of their horrible fantasies on. But the story's not over, unfortunately. Yeah.
Gave us
Yes,
so
sorry.
much to think about.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering if you might want to say something a little bit more about the expatriate scene in Istanbul, because
Sure.
you started out as an expatriate, right?
And I still am.
And
Yeah.
you still are,
And I
but
always will
also,
be. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are quite a number of expatriates
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
academics and writers
Yeah.
and so on. And
Yeah.
how, how does that play in? Because of course the
Yeah.
expatriate has can enjoy, everything that Istanbul,
Yeah.
all the pleasures of Istanbul, and yet can, if times get tough, that there is always the possibility of
Yeah.
retreat back into your own
Well,
country.
I think when 1970 happened, or when I found out what was happening during the coup, I felt this very, very strongly. I felt that that my classmates were actually imprisoned because they'd had a partly Western education and they'd been encouraged to ask questions, and that had ended them up in jail. And why had we just gone home? Wasn't there a responsibility there? With this book, Enlightenment, what I started becoming interested while writing it was actually the history of expatriates, because Robert College, now Boğaziçi, was founded in 1863, and people coming on 3-year contracts. That's a lot of 3-year contracts, and yeah, yeah. But there was never any. We were never bothered to find out whom we had replaced. And we had never any really communication with the people who stepped into our shoes. And so Turkey is talking an awful lot about erased histories of various types now, but that's another one of the erased histories. One of the interesting things at Orhan's trial was Doğu Perinçek, that lovely man, was out there, former Maoist and now ultranationalist, now behind bars, I'm glad to say. Part of the Ergenekon thing, and he was out there with his his thugs, and they had a big banner. I remember one of my friends my Turkish friends looking and saying, "What's become of our fascists? They're getting so old." But their banner had Murat Belge, Orhan, Hrant Dink, and Cemal Hasan. So a number of things, and it was denouncing them all as misyoner çocuklar, which means missionary children, and the implication is that they went to their minds were corrupted by foreign schools, and it's true, it's true that their education had an effect on them, and so I would say that the foreign it's a very sensitive issue still about what part foreign schools and foreign education has played in the Westernization project, and particularly during the Republic. And I think the U.S. has played a very, very significant role. We get that in all the paranoids, with the conspiracy theories, but actually it's a much, much more interesting story. So that's what I'm going to be doing for a few books now. I'm going to be looking at that in different ways. I feel really stupid. It never occurred to me before what history I was part of, because we were always being told that we were guests in this country and we were going home, and not to meddle in things.
Are there more expats now than there were before?
Well, Turkey's, it was pretty closed when we first moved there. I mean, it wasn't a completely closed economy, but you could only get Ipana toothpaste. Do you remember those? It was it had a lot of the sweetness of a society was cut off from everybody, from other countries. But it opened up, and of course there's been immigration to Europe, and that come back. So it's a very open place now, and of course that means that a lot of it's easier to set up business as a foreigner, and so there are lots and lots of hybrids, people who are, I wouldn't call them foreigners, but they're certainly not pure Turks, if you like.
First, just a comment along those lines. I think it was not, as you know, just the expats or the foreign, but for most of us who have been outside the country, there is that kind of attitude, this resentment of our friends who have been there throughout all of things. That I myself also have had the same experience, and it's very frustrating when someone says to you, you have been away, you don't know, kind of thing. It's very hard to tell them that, yes, you have been away, but you follow everything. You go every summer, you go, and still, by the fact that you have been either educated abroad or working abroad, There's
Yeah.
this, the more nationalist official ideology that penetrates to your high school friends.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yes.
You go back and
Yes.
suddenly you realize that there's a gap there, and they're the same nice people, but when it comes to suddenly a political thing,
Yeah,
you've been away. You don't know. You've been naive.
Yeah, and would you say that has grown in recent years?
Very much.
Yeah,
so.
and I think the ultranationalist campaign that used Orhan and the others as pawns has been extraordinarily successful.
Yeah, the Orhan and
Yeah.
Branding issue. Those
Yeah.
I see that gap growing.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, we can talk endlessly about these personal experiences. I want to thank you, and also I am very embarrassed because I haven't yet read your novel. I have bought it in Boston, but I didn't get to it. But I still, knowing what it's about, I really want to thank you for taking this very difficult position that you are trying to explain to us here, which is that kind of immense connection with these very complex political issues there that I was going to ask, maybe in comparison with some of these other friends who have been writing novels about set in Turkey, let's say, especially the mystery novels, and I'm thinking of Jenny White, and,
Yes.
Who's a good friend, but there's Jason Goodwin, etc. And I couldn't help
Who's a good friend of mine.
this comparison because I will be very open here.
Yeah.
I mean, Jenny is a good friend, and I've said this to her, that's why I can say it to her, but I read her first novel. I didn't even read the second novel because it is sort of this Ottoman setting, very Orientalist tropes, etc. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is people, other sort of multi or cross-cultural friends, novelists, have chosen a different path. In other words, Jenny also is very political, she is a blog and everything. But the novel is something else. So you seem to be much more, your role as novelist, but also your political persona and everything seems to be so much more blurred, and that's a very, very difficult thing.
Well, I've written quite light novels as well, but when I'm writing a novel, I mean, what Frank, my husband, says is that the only novels of mine that have any heart to them are the ones that take place in Turkey. And this novel is different. I mean, it took me a very, very long time to write it as well because I really wanted to. I realized that the picture I'd been given and then kept and cherished about my life, my upbringing, the society of which he was part, was false. And a lot of things there brushed out. And so I wanted to find out, look beyond that. And the pact I made with myself was that everything in the book would be, if it hadn't happened to me, it had happened to somebody else. Every fragment is true. I've arranged it into another story. I wanted to get it close enough so that it hurt, that it broke my heart, and I wanted to see what went beyond it. And I thought that if I didn't do that, I was going to spend the rest of my life being writing books in which terrible things happened in 1970, and nobody knows why. So it seemed to be, again, this kind of story that I had to look at. But because of that, it means that the things I write about. I mean, it has this kind of predictive fiction. I'll write something and then it will happen, or something odd will happen in my life. The strongest character in it is a classmate called Suna, who says a lot of things about cultural imperialism, makes her classmates feel quite miserable. And I adore this character, and it's based on, it's not, it's inspired by somebody, but it's not that person, but inspired. I was in the Frankfurt Book Fair, and we were doing an event at this beautiful literature house, and there were very hand-picked guests, and we were talking about it, and I was talking about this, but I mentioned names, I think, and we went downstairs to have lunch, and the officer for multiculturalism in Frankfurt, came up to me. She'd been in the audience. She took my hand and she said, "She's there. She's there." This person whose name I'm not mentioning, I hadn't seen in 38 years. I went over, and she was giving an interview. She was looking just the way I'd imagine a person like that in magnificent middle age. And I said, "Do you know who I am?" And she said, "No," and I gave my name. And she said, "Oh," she said, "I heard you put me into a book. Don't do that again." So, yeah, that gets to be confusing. Yes. So.
Well, it is admiring what you are continuing to try to do, because I understand this difficulty of translating Turkey to the public here, because we are all in some ways in that position,
Yeah.
and I would do it in an academic audience, people who know about
Yeah.
Turkey, but in the general public, it's so tiring. I
It is.
get very tired of always explaining Turkey.
And what do you have to explain most? What are the?
Well, you know how it is. I mean, it is. You have these multiple personalities almost, because when you're here, things that when you're back there, you are very critical of certain things.
Yeah.
But here you come across a comment that suddenly makes you almost nationalist. So
Yes.
there is this
Yes.
incredible dilemma of.
Yes. And then there's another thing I did last year is, do any of you know the book Anna Annem?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes? I love that book. It's a memoir, very simply written, but actually very, very sophisticated in its construction. It's about it's by Svetja Chitin, who was the lawyer for Hrant Dink and continues to be the lawyer for his family. She comes from the far left originally, and she was a human rights lawyer. And she found out quite a lot, when she was in her 30s, I think, when she was, that her favorite grandmother who brought her up was actually not, had been pulled off the death marches, and had this, and then it took on another identity, was adopted by the policeman, or a sort of gendarme person. And then went on to have a life as a happy and well-respected Muslim housewife. It's a heartbreak of a book, and it's one of the interesting things about it is that she says, she's such a controversial character politically. She's not had one single hate letter the whole time, because it's a book that has that kind of speaks to the heartbreak in everybody, and it's very, very redemptive. It's very short, and I translated it for Verso. And I was so appalled by this very, this very sophisticated, nice editor. His questions he asked, and Fethiye Çetin grows up in the southeast of Turkey, in a, don't need to tell, a country that's where school children are getting a certain kind of history with certain things in there and certain things left out, which is, I thought, would be kind of easy to understand. And he's saying, well, she's taking place in exactly the oh, there, yeah. She's this is it. Right? The editor is saying she's growing up in a town, just one town down from where her grandmother was pulled off the death marches. So why doesn't she know about it? Is she stupid? And that kind, and then he was also, this is one of the best mistakes an editor has ever made. This grandmother who's grown up in the very in Maden and near Diyarbakir, and she's 85 years old or something when she tells her granddaughter the truth, and there they are sitting in Ankara, I think, and she's telling her story very painfully and needs to take a break, and so her granddaughter says, "Why don't I make you some coffee, köpük kahve," and with coffee with bubbles, and that got fixed by the editor as being cappuccino. And I just said, "There's no cappuccino for this grandmother, believe me." But because of that, and he was misreading, basically just misreading, because he didn't have the information and was too arrogant to think that he needed to get it, that it was decided that there needed to be a preface to explain some things. Now, this is a very where is it? There. It's not a very long preface. and it was hard to, how long is it? It's like that. But I knew that this book would be bought by a lot of people who had, well, would certainly be, there's a market amongst Armenians living in England and Australia and this country and Canada. And I wanted to make sure there was another problem. There were going to be other problems about how they were going to be reading this, and I wanted to make it very, very hard for that group to misread, and I wanted to make it very hard for other groups to say, was Fethi Çetin stupid or whatever. And so I just did this kind of preface in which I tried to give certain facts so that they would be able to go into it and understand it. But the person who, and I got a lot of advice and I went through a few drafts, the person who was most upset by that was Fethi herself. And
By the fact of the preface?
she didn't want a preface. She wanted the book to stand on its own. And she's right. She's right. But what she doesn't know, because she lives in Turkey, is just how little people understand. I have this argument with Orhan all the time when we're doing articles, during that time when he was my little character in my little column. How I miss those days. And we would mention Ataturk. And I would always put in, at a certain point, founding father of the Republic. And he'd say, we don't have to put that in. I say, oh, yes, we do. And he would be, I don't think, now that he lives in in New York part of the time, I think he understands this. But at the time, he was living in Istanbul, and he just assumed, well, he said, why don't they know? Well, exactly, why don't they know? But you spend a lot of your time complaining and trying not to lose your temper, yes?
I was actually thinking of another novel. I'm just these days reading this The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking of that because it has all these footnotes with the history of Dominican San Domingo. I thought, maybe Turkish translations need something like that too. And in the case of Köpüklü Kahve, for example, could one leave it in Turkish and then different people have different preferences, but I think Fethia and Orhan are similar, and then they have an idea of the integrity of their work, and they don't want it to be added onto. Now, Orhan's idea about footnotes or prefaces or glossaries is they make, and this is the worst insult he gives me on a bad day, and we had one of those, as I said, you make me feel ethnic. And it is, this defined by a Western editor for the benefit of a very lazy Western reader. I would like, there's a history movement in Turkey to challenge official history. I would like to have there be a history movement in England, so that they can find out a little bit more about some of the mistakes they made. But that's not. I don't see. Every time I bring it up in England, the dinner party ends. But I think in the case of Diaz's book, the success of it is that the footnotes are part of the message. It certainly doesn't make it ethnic. Yeah. Well,
have any of you read the Museum of Innocence in Turkish? Yeah. So he does. The conceit is that it's a man talking about this rather eccentric museum that he's set up for to commemorate lost innocence and his lost love and so on and so forth. And so it allows him, the form of the novel allows him to say museums who come to visitors who come to our museum in later generations when everybody's happy because they've overcome all of these sexual problems may not know that. And then he can give the information, but also have it as a kind of a joke. And this is one of the many things that I think Anglophone readers are going to have a hard time with. They won't get the joke.
Are you translating that book?
I'm translating. Yes, I guess. I love it. I love the book, though. Yeah. And one day Orhan will love my translation, and that will be all fine.
And the museum will open in 2010.
We hope. Yes.
You've talked about how you've been labeled as like a cultural imperialist.
Yeah.
before. Just,
Yeah.
When you write and translate your work into Turkish,
I don't translate my work into Turkish.
do you write in?
No, I write only in English.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
Yeah, but it has been translated.
Oh, okay.
I have translated.
Okay, so
Okay.
when it is translated in Turkish,
Yeah.
do you ever fear that people will take it as Orientalist, and are you conscious of that as you write?
Well,
or?
see, I don't think. I mean, I grew up there, you know,
Yeah.
and it's my, it's my home. I don't think I'm never going to be a citizen of Turkey, but I've come to that after long and much agony. I'd say, well, this is ridiculous. What are these categories I keep on tormenting myself with? I grew up there. I grew up looking at the rest of the world from there. My difficult relationship with my country of birth comes from looking at America from the outside, being on the receiving end of some very, very strange foreign policies, and sitting in Istanbul and learning about the American Revolution. So it's this kind of, we were never taught the history of where we were. We were always taught about the history of this other kind of strange place where my grandparents lived. Yeah. So I think it's actually very simple. You're from the place you're from, and other people. If you know that, it doesn't matter if somebody else doesn't want you there, or those slurs only work if you're doubting yourself. Yes.
Do you have arguments with your Turkish translators, like Orhan has
No,
with you?
no. I'm really nice to her. Yeah, but that's sort of like I'm really nice to people who look after my children, because I used to be badly treated when I was looking after other. Really nice to secretaries, because I was very badly treated. Had some horrible bosses. So, yeah, and she's very nice and very, very accurate. Very responsible. So,
Can
yes,
I ask
actually, she was at Northwestern. Yeah, the translator. Yeah.
why you didn't choose to translate your own work?
Because I wouldn't be able to.
Really?
Yeah. No, I mean, the translating in, they're passive and active languages. I mean, that's how I can wriggle out of this one.
Okay.
But I was never schooled in Turkish. I translate into Turkish in my nightmares. In my nightmares, I'm suddenly sent into a room and I'm asked to translate. And then I'm exposed as a fraud. But it's a good ambition. In my next life, on the side, I'll do a doctorate in Turkish studies. And then I'll be able to. My son is studying Turkish and linguistics, so maybe he can do it for me. Yeah.
You read other languages. Have you looked at other translations of Orhan into, say, German or French or Spanish? And
I haven't yet. I've met the guy. I've met the translators. I mean, he's translated into 58 languages. 58, I think, is what he was saying. And most of those come from the English, which is the other reason why I think we should work together. But that was kind of my choice. Now, as far as the other translators who go direct from the Turkish, I think we're all friends now, but we sure weren't before. And so they will all read the English translation and then decide what I've done wrong, and then tell him. And wherever he spends the summer, he used to be Heybeliada, and now it's when he was staying in this little island about half an hour outside Istanbul in the Sea of Marmara. Whenever I'd go out there to work with him, it'd be crawling with neglected translators. Yes, and or they'd be arriving on there'd be the Spanish translator for lunch, and then the German translator for dinner, and the Russian translator in the spare room, and the Greek translator looking out the window, and so it's an awful lot of people to manage and to keep happy. One day, if I have any time, I should do that. Go look at those other. I know that when I was in Stockholm, the Swedish Academy person I was seated next to told me in detail about how, if somebody's under consideration, they look at all the translations and they compare them. And in the case of Orhan, in many, many different countries, there are problems with the or there are perceived problems with the translation. And they said that he has a very good German translator right now. But they said there were so many problems with it that they decided, a lot of people were arguing that there must be something wrong with the original. And of course, as you know, a lot of, that's a kind of a standard line in Turkey. But it was because he had done work, that we'd worked on translations together, and that they liked those translations, and they sort of argued that those were kind of more official translations because he'd been through them. That it tipped the balance a little bit, they said. While we're on the subject of that, the line in sort of the Beyoğlu gossip line, or things that you'll read in newspapers. In fact, there was an article only a few weeks ago to say Orhan Pamuk writes for his translator, Maureen Freely, and then she makes him palatable for Western audiences. So that's where I run into trouble, is more as a translator. And a lot of people believe that, and a lot of people will say to me, who hate him for political reasons, I'll just say, couldn't bear the book, love the translation, ha ha ha. And that's very it's very painful. Yes.
Some people say that Orhan Pamuk's translation, Orhan Pamuk writes bad in bad Turkish, and Orhan Pamuk's translations by Maureen Freely are much better.
I know they say that. I mean but I don't get it, because I know he has very convoluted sentences sometimes, but I think they work in Turkish. I think that trance, and it's also where he begins and how many times he turns you over, and particularly in the new book, he's doing more interesting things. Yeah.
So, but another question that comes to my mind is that I think what you're giving the other colors, you translated before and now you're retranslating.
Oh, that's a bit. This is a collection of essays, and there was a book in Turkish called Ataturk, which means other colors, and that came out in 1999. And when he brought out the essay collection last year, what he wanted to include all of the essays he'd written between 1999 and because he'd done some of his best work, some of his best essays during that time. So he and then he had this idea again, a new concept, which is he was looking for going through all the articles, essays he'd written in that book and elsewhere, and looking for the ones in which he kind of stumbled onto something that seemed to be a little bit more than the intended subject. So that was the idea, to put all of those together and see what they added up to. But a lot of people were upset that he left out some really good essays on important Turkish writers, and that adds to the lack of knowledge about Turkish letters, I would say. Yeah, so we'll hope he makes up for that sometime. Yeah?
That's a really good question. Does he ever write in a language besides Turkish, primary document?
Sometimes he's written some things in English.
And then do you work with him?
Those things are not really workable. But what we do is that if he doesn't like, if he thinks I have done a sentence that's bad, I mean, this is how we go through the things. And then I say, well, okay, if it's bad, we'll come up with some other solution. And then he'll explain what's the thought of what he sees behind that sentence, and then he will try something out. And then I say, it's bad. And we don't have that in English. And he says, okay, let's find this. And so the two of us will work something out. And it's fun when we work it out. It's lots of fun. But he does sometimes call himself a prisoner of Turkish. But I think he does wonderfully interesting things with Turkish. And I'm glad at least one person in the room agrees.
So perhaps we have to hope that Maureen Freely goes to Turkey back again for a happy occasion, not for a bad one,
Yes.
for a disastrous one.
Yeah.
And please help me thank Maureen Freely once again for this wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me.